Right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to discuss with you today the reasons why we simply have to get out of the EU. Santayana, the Spanish philosopher, said, "Those who do not know the past are deemed to repeat it." I say that our pussy willow politicians will ensure that we are doomed to repeat it, whether we like it or not. From the 1683 siege of Vienna to the siege of the Channel Tunnel this week. From the Henry VIII's reclamation of church land and church tax back to the United Kingdom from Rome, to Heath's dishonest entry into the EU for us. Heath's motives were as dishonest as indeed his presentation of his sexuality. And I shall now present to you EU, no country for old men. It broke cover in 1992. The tyres were shot out. He screamed. He was shot in the shoulder. He got out of the car. He had to run for his life. He was shot in the neck and died on the roadside instantly. He was Salvo Lima, the MEP of the Italian islands. He'd been assassinated by the mafia for failing to secure a not guilty plea at a recent trial. To this day, we will never know the extent of his influence over the EU. However, from that date onward, we can see how entrenched corruption is in the EU. In 1999, EU corruption broke cover again with the Jack Santa scandal. Jack Santa and the entire EU Commission had to resign en masse because they were all implicated in corruption involving nepotism. Did this move things forward? Did this glorious organisation, the EU, become the integrity, the sincere leader of Europe? No, it certainly didn't, because Jack Santa was replaced by Romano Prodi, and alongside Romano Prodi was employed that legendary urinator, famous for pissing all over the British Constitution, Neil Kinnock. What did Neil Kinnock do to clean up the EU? What did he do exactly? Well, Marta Andreasen, the well-known accountant, said that he tried to stop her from speaking in Parliament about the extreme vulnerability the EU budget was to fraud, about the fact that basic minimum accounting standards were not followed, and about the fact that the computer system was very, very weak and subject to possible fraudulent attack. He tried to stop her speaking at Parliament. He even went so far as to take legal advice to stop her speaking about this matter before the European parliamentary committees. What else happened under Kinnock's watch? Well, we had the Eurostat scandal. Eurostat is the equivalent of the ONS. During his watch, I think it was about 5 million euros went missing into a personal account. He apparently knew about this before the story broke, according to Stern magazine, as there was correspondence passing between him and I don't know who other. What else happened under Kinnock's regime? He was there to clean things up. What was cleaned up? Well, I say absolutely nothing. The next stage, 2002, led to the invention of the Bin Laden, well known and seldom seen, the 500 euro note. That came to the United Kingdom and was used in 90% of high net worth money laundering transactions. In April 2010, the United Kingdom banned the 500 euro note from circulation in this country. Was it banned in the EU? No, of course it wasn't. It chugs on regardless. And it sort of made its way largely to Spain, so I don't know what's happening in Spain at the moment. Round about the same time of Prodi, we had the OLAF set up. That's the fraud machine, the fraud investigation machine of the EU. Was that effective? Well, not really. In the 1990s, it did all it could to hush over and silence the Fletcher diary scandal involving butter subsidies in France. That was all quietly hushed up insofar as was humanly possible. There was criticism as well of France Hans Brunner, who was the head of OLAF. He was in the process of looking for a new employee, the Director of Investigations, and indeed a Eurocrat who was under investigation themselves for fraud, was handed the job of investigating that and processing the employment. Very odd business indeed. So we've gone from the assassination in 1992 of Salvo Lima, and I shall now take you back to the absolute epicentre of EU fraud. In the 1990s, the EU paid about £40 million to Calabria, the southern state of Italy, in order to set up a container port called Gioia Tauro. Gioia Tauro is going to bring great riches to the EU. We were all going to share, because we are, all, after all, a union, we were all going to share into the wonderful goods that would be coming into the United States of Europe from that great construction, the container port at Gioia Tauro. What in fact happened was that led to about 80% of the cocaine of Europe comes through that port. It developed a strong link with the Colombian and Mexican cartels, and I really don't think it really benefited the ordinary person in the street, but it significantly benefited the Calabrian mafia. So that's 40 million euros in the 1990s gone to Gioia Tauro. What did Olaf do? Well, not very much as far as I'm aware. Next stage on, we have the legendary A3, that is the coastal highway between Calabria and Naples. Over a 10-year period, 8 billion euros was ploughed into that project. Again, there didn't seem to be any concern by the EU, didn't seem to be much concern by Olaf. But around about July 2012, they got round to it, and they assessed that despite giving over 12 billion euros to the Calabrian, I will say mafia, perhaps that's a harsh word to use, they decided that only 383 million euros of that could actually be down to kickbacks and overcharging. So what did they do? Well, contrary to public reporting, all they said was, well, if you can guarantee to use that 383 million euros in a clean project in Calabria, we'll say no more about it. So who knows where that money went? We will never know to this day. Now, fraud is absolutely endemic, particularly with the green industries, renewable energies, wind farms, solar panelling. It's reached a stage now where we are facilitating significant pressure on local people. Perhaps in Sicily, you have lands there. They've been subject to arson, they've been subject to threatening phone calls in order to give up of their land cheaply to the local mafia, who of course have the EU grants to set up wind farms. Gradually, through EU funding and through lack of intervention, the mafia has successfully evolved into a white-collar international trade, whereby it has slowly sold off its wind farms to people and companies wholly unrelated to organised crime. A hugely successful money laundering operation by the EU and the mafia. There are plenty of examples of corrupt politicians, corrupt EU bureaucrats. We had Ernest Strasser in 2014, who was subject to a 4-year prison sentence. He was subject to a Sunday Times sting. The Sunday Times journalists recorded him, filmed him. That's illegal in Austria, by the way, to film someone without their knowledge. And now we know why, because that went public. It was found out that he had actually accepted a notional salary for 100,000 euros per annum, which was entirely fake, and went to prison for 4 years. We also had Jack Daly, the Maltese EU Health Commissioner. He was forced to resign for selling personal contacts and influence to the tobacco industry. So really, it's somewhat of a cesspit of fraud. I could go on and on and on. I could tell you about the Spanish mayor who managed to get 56,000 euros from the EU in order to set up a riding school. In fact, what it was a roadside brothel called Seventh Heaven. So, there's plenty of strange and bizarre fraud. Even in the United Kingdom, we managed a bit of graft with a British sugar factory in 2007, had to close down because of the sugar rationing with regard to EU. So they could no longer sell at the level they wanted to sell at. So they closed down, and 2 days later they opened up and got 93 million euros in 2 instalments for what I'm not too sure, but the EU paid out and it was all legitimate. They never had to pay it back. So a bit of graft coming our way for a change. Every country has been touched by graft in the EU. It is basically a fraud pit. It's eating into our rule of law. People say that if we leave the EU, we will have lack of influence in the world. Well, I would say that's not the case at all. What influence does Bulgaria have now? What influence does Greece have? Do we really want to become like Calabria? Do we want to be associated with this level of graft and corruption? I would say absolutely not. For everyone knows that a lady is known by the company she keeps, and my goodness, what company we're keeping these days. Thank you.